This is a great intro. Welcome
Yeah.
to the Mind Body Energy Project. Good morning, Tiffany.
Good morning, Yolanda.
Just make sure my ringer is off. That's always good for our podcasting.
Yes.
How was your weekend, Dollface?
My weekend was good.
Yeah.
Had a few places I had to be, and then spent a little time on the couch nursing a cold, which was not fun, but you do what you got to do, right?
Oh, honey, yes. Knock on wood. I'm good right now. I actually spent the weekend in Sedona. A friend
Oh
of
my
mine and I.
gosh, that's right. How did we not
Yeah.
talk about this before behind the scenes?
I
Oh
know.
my God.
I
I
know.
feel like you're holding a secret from me now instead of leading off with that.
Oh God, honey, I feel like I'm still in recovery, as you saw
Ah,
behind the scenes.
yes,
Like,
yes, yes.
I'm like, hello, who am I? Where am I? But
Yeah.
yeah. So we had a girls' weekend road trip, and we went to the Paul Selig event, and you know how much I love his work. So yeah, it was really amazing, as per usual, and yeah, I had a good time. And it's funny, this morning when I was in the shower thinking about, we're talking about spirit guides today, and I was thinking about being at that event and how he channels and all his
Yeah.
work is like through his guides. And
What a perfect experience to lead into this discussion.
yeah, no, it really, really is. And so, before we start, I just want to thank our Patreons, because this particular topic was actually suggested by one of our Patreons. So thank you. I'm sure a lot of people, have interest in spirit guides. We get questions. I know I do. I get emails all the time about this topic and people wanting to connect with their guides and blah, blah, blah. But what was I going to tell you? Oh, so I just wanted to say, as just like an encouragement to everyone, like, please let us know what you would like for us to talk about. Any topics, any things that come up for you that you would like to discuss here in the Mind Body Energy Project. We love your recommendations.
Yes, this is a community-based project, and we don't want this to be about just Yolanda and myself.
No. I mean, and the truth is too, I mean, we both, like for the example, this topic, like we both work with, well, I think you do. We both work with spirit guides and are aware of them or have had experiences with them, things all around that. And so it may not be a topic that would have necessarily come up for us, you know what I mean? Because it's just something we've already played with, I guess you would say, or have awareness around. So that's why it is really like, we genuinely mean it. Like, let us know what you want to talk about, because it may be things that we wouldn't consider. So.
Yeah, I have to say for myself, I do play around with spirit guides from time to time, and sometimes I think that they're just there without me even consciously recognizing my utilization of them. So it's kind of something that's in the background, and that the utilization of that kind of brings more of the conscious awareness of things that we talk about.
Right.
So, I would think I would look more at the conscious things that I'm experiencing through life and not really ever think to pull in something like the spirit guides or how they do play a part in the conscious things that we talk about. So it is really great to hear kind of more the esoteric things that people want to talk about, how they link in with our conscious experiences.
Yeah, and actually what you just said, it reminded me of something, but I'm going to save it for later. So I guess from the top, one of the things I was thinking about too, because, a lot of people even wonder exactly like what you said, like, are they already around? What are spirit guides? Do I have to call them in? How do I get to know them? How many do I have? Like, those are usually the common questions around this. And so if you are new to the Mind Body Energy Project, Tiffany and I we have a discussion first. Then next week we'll have a community discussion about it. And then we do bonus content for our Patreons around the topic. So just for people who may be just questioning what are spirit guides, period, I thought it'd be good for us to maybe start there about like, what the heck is this, right? So from my experience, and actually this just came through in a channeling this year. I taught a class earlier this year called Fabric of Creation. And one of the weeks, the focus was on how we are multidimensional beings and what multidimensionality means. But one of the things that came up around that, specific to not just spirit guides, but just the fact that there are various levels of existence or various frequencies within this realm of existence, right? So imagine that, like, yes, we are here and we can see certain things in this vibration, like the trees or animals. Like, there are things that we can see with our physical eyes, but there are also things that exist right here in the same field with us that we only perceive if we either like tune into that particular frequency of whatever that thing is, or if, we do certain practices to allow ourselves to open up more intuitively so that it's more just regular for us to see the unseen. But anyway, the basic thing is that there are things that exist in multiple frequencies, and it's just a matter of what we are perceiving or not. So,
right. So we hear often about how babies and animals see things that we don't. Maybe ghost spirits or just other things that are happening on said other dimensions or whatever we want to call them. They're able to see different things because they're open to it. And then we as humans we're taught by those who have come before us. It's almost like oral tradition, things that have been passed down, and all that's been passed down is what we can see. So it's almost as we grow and as we learn, what we consciously see narrows. And reasonably so, like to some degree, that has to happen in order to survive, right? But that doesn't mean that these other things don't still exist, and that maybe we need to do another type of training in order to see it or experience it.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about it too, is that just like I said, like things exist in different frequencies, but it's like it's all here. And so while, say for example, Tiffany and I were in the same room, and I for some reason tuned into something that I was able to see intuitively or even with my physical eyes, but for some reason she wasn't. A lot of us have been taught, like, if someone else can't validate what is seen by us, then we made it up or it's imagination. So I think a lot of reasons of why we don't, like, we grow out of that, like you said, like how babies and animals can sense and see other things. I think we grow out of that in a lot of ways, or block it in some ways, because we grow up hearing that we are either imagining things, or there's a lot of fear-based teachings around it. So a lot of us grew up with these stories, or even maybe religious beliefs around anything that you perceive that is not material is like evil or bad or scary or ghosts or dead or this or that, like all of these things. And while, yeah, some of those things exist, there are so many other things that exist. It's, and it's interesting because in this realm we tend to categorize as just like, oh, there are spirit guides, and then there are, like, some people work with the angelic realm, and some people also acknowledge crossovers or people who have passed away. But there's so many other levels of existence even beyond those categories. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, so I guess if we reel it on in, our spirit guides have a lot of different definitions, and people believe them to be various things. And just so you know, it depends on the school of thought. But I always say, go with your experience as well. So some people will tell you have like 10,000 guides, like so many guides. Other people will say you have like 3 to 5, right? A lot of what we are told or what is passed on is based on personal experience, not necessarily fact. So, take everything with a grain of salt. I would just want to say that up front. And even what I will say today is based on my own experience. So I'm just putting that disclaimer too. Yeah.
You reined it back in, but I want to cast it back out really quickly.
Oh, okay.
So you were saying how if you and I were in a room and you saw something and I didn't see it, and part of that is, fear-based because we're like, oh shoot, like why did I see that and I shouldn't see it. I think part of what brings in that fear is the mystery that is the mind and our brains, because there's so much we don't know about how these things have worked. I mean, even science is still working a lot on that, so and then another component of it, I think, is, which I'm very passionate about, is mental illness. People are afraid to say that they see these things or hear these things or whatever, because there is this fine line and a volatility of our mentality where things get labeled as mental illness and then they're not explored. And then we just give it this label. And while maybe some of that may be true, some of it might not be true, like there could be something happening that we have labeled as mental illness because we've been too scared to really examine it. And then we just try to stifle it away because we can't solve it, or we can't explain it. And that's part of our human ego. And I think that's something that we kind of battle. But on the other side of the coin of this is also psychedelics. There is a lot of scientific research going on with psychedelics and things that they can prove and that they can see with, it's not just chemistry of the brain, it's actually allowing the brain to be utilized in a different way, so I'm just throwing this out there as other things to think about when we're trying to expand how we see and how we see with our eyes, or how we see with our third eye, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, like it's funny, I'm kind of laughing because it's like we're talking about spirit guides, yes, but I love, because you never know. We never know what we're going to say, even when there's a topic. And I'm like, oh, this is getting so juicy and in depth. I think it's good, though, foundation before we, Yeah.
And I meant to say, too, a disclaimer to that before I casted that far out, is that would probably send us on a really far out tangent. So we'll rip it back in and save that for another podcast.
Yeah, well, but you said three things that you brought up that I have to touch up really quick, and then we really will circle back. So one thing with people who are interested in connecting with their guides, I mean, one really basic thing you can do is just allow yourself to accept that it's possible, just giving yourself permission to say, telling the mind, yes, it is possible that I can perceive more than I have perceived so far, or I am making a choice to allow myself to open up my perception and my awareness, my sensitivity, so that I can perceive beyond what may be recognized as material. So that's one. Another thing that you mentioned was how you see. And I just want to point this out for people really quickly, because when we talk about spirit guides, a lot of people link it with intuitive viewing or seeing, and they think that it's something they are trying to see visually with their physical eyes. Well, I didn't see my guides. But in the language of intuition, when people say I saw, a lot of times they don't mean that they literally visually saw. That word is used interchangeably speaking about intuition. It's like, I see, if I see something, I could mean that I felt it physically. I can mean that I just sensed it. I perceived it somehow. I may have felt something in the room, or maybe I just had a knowing, or this inner vision that isn't necessarily coming through my physical eyes. So also allow yourself to know that seeing or perceiving goes beyond just the physical eyes.
We talked about that on Reiki Radio that we just recorded for Yolanda's podcast. And we were talking about Reiki, and I had mentioned how in a session I had felt the word grandmother. And it was really, it's weird. It's hard to give words to feeling a word. I didn't see it. I felt a word. And until you experience it, there's really no words to describe it, but you can't judge how you're going to perceive the experience.
Yeah. And that's a really big one, I think, because, we get so caught up in the technicality and our own language, and our language in those ways can limit us. And so again, just be open, not just to the possibility of being able to perceive your guides, but also, again, accepting that how you perceive them could be in a multitude of ways, and there is no right or wrong, and there's definitely not just one way. So the last thing that you said that I have to touch on really quick is you mentioned psychedelics. And this, again, is just my opinion. And also I asked about it years ago because I had a client who was very interested in doing like ayahuasca and all of these things. And part of their reasoning was they wanted to connect with their guides in other realms. And so from my point of view, you're designed for this. I mean, you are designed to be able to perceive, and you are intuitive, and it's just a matter of learning how to strengthen those aspects of yourself or tune into those aspects of yourself. And while different like plant technologies or things like ayahuasca, anything that may be mind altering, they do open up our consciousness or our awareness to maybe other realms and other frequencies and other dimensions that we might not normally tune into in our conscious state. I think it's a good idea not to be dependent on that. Like, I think some people do it, you know, for some healing experiences and those types of things, and, you know, no judgment, whatever. But just know that you don't have to be dependent on those things in order to access higher levels of consciousness or other levels of awareness. And there are tools that you can use to develop your natural ability to tune into these other states of consciousness.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I 100% agree with that. I don't do psychedelics, just for anybody out there, partially because it terrifies me, but I am very interested because same thing, I do know that we're capable of it. And the research I do on it, I leave to the scientists who are willing to put themselves through it and have the knowledge base of understanding chemicals and the body and the combination of those things. But, and I think this is kind of what the Mind Body Energy Project is fully based on, understanding what we are, what our design is in order to fully utilize it. And we are capable of doing that without these other things. And part of it goes to all the other things that we've podcasted about thus far and things that we will in the future is how do we get into this place where we can recognize our natural tendencies?
Yeah. So even with that too, I mean, talking about spirit guides, and now you guys, we are looping back into it.
Yeah,
but when we talk about our spirit guides, I mean, one of the things I think is also important to know is like, yes, we can start with the possibility and open ourselves up to like, oh, I can perceive beyond the physical realm. Know that your ability to perceive not just your guides, just other things that are unseen to the, you know, the physical eyes, potentially for a while, that you may have to work on that. So you may perceive energies or your guides right now by sensing or feeling them. And if that is the case, don't discredit that and think like, oh, it's not good enough because I can't see them. Allow yourself to like kind of hone that skill that you have of even just feeling them. Notice what this experience is like. Like, don't be dismissive of how you develop and strengthen your communication and connectivity to them, because it will shift and change and you will have, you know, different experiences.
Yeah, and softening into the experience, because I think once we get a signal or a sense of something happening, it's almost like immediately set up these other expectations, which kind of like harden the experience in a sense, you know. But if we soften into it and let it just develop naturally how it's going to, it's going to develop the best way the best way we need it to. So as long as we just allow versus trying to set expectations and see if we hit those milestones, just letting it unfold as it should.
Totally. So just for us, because we love to talk about all this stuff and we really will go off on tangents, I'm going to try to reel us in and by asking you a question.
Okay.
So 2 questions. One, what is your first memory of maybe seeing or connecting with a guide, or even if you didn't know they were a guide per se, just seeing or perceiving something that was not in form? And I'll just start with that one.
Well, interestingly enough, when I was a freshman in high school, I had a cousin who passed away.
Mm-hmm.
and he was 8 years old. And I remember feeling very connected to that experience. And I very distinctly remember my grandmother saying, like, referring to him and that he is there and can like hear us, and, you know, that he's still with us. And it was interesting for her to say that to me because it was after a while after he had passed away. And I had remembered as even like a 12 or 13-year-old sensing that already. And then
Mm-hmm.
when my grandmother validated it, I was like, oh, okay. You know, so I mean, that was a very early experience, but it was very interesting. And I remember always feeling that he was connected somehow,
Yeah.
even though he wasn't physically here.
I think that's a way a lot of people, it's like a common way that people may sense the presence of beings not in form. Is a lot of people have the experience of sensing their loved ones who have crossed over, and interestingly they tend to, or we tend to separate that from the possibility of being able to sense our guides and our angels and these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because, you know, we knew these people in form, so we knew that they existed, so there's a part of us that believes or can really conceptualize that because I knew them in form, I can also tune into them beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas our guides and say whatever it is, other things, because we never met them in form, it's almost like, I think it's harder sometimes for people to wrap their brains around. But
Yeah.
I say that to say, if you can perceive, like, you know, someone who has crossed over, you can also perceive other uh, energies that are not in form.
I'm going to share another thing that's kind of really interesting where it's going to bring us like a little bit closer to spirit guides, but still on the side of people we've known that passed away. I was working with a friend. She was going through holistic health practitioner school,
Mm-hmm.
and she was doing a certain energy called Jin Shin, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was her guinea pig. She had to do a research paper on it. So for 5 or 6 weeks, we did continuous energy sessions, and they were really, really interesting how they progressed. But there were 3 different ones where she met my younger self at 3 very distinct ages. And after the sessions, we talk about it, and it was really interesting how at each one of those particular ages, something significant had happened in my childhood. And so I kind of use them as my spirit guide. Like they're part of my spirit group,
Right.
thinking about myself at that younger age, because to me it felt like they showed up in that energy session to help me heal from something and give me messages, and to be like, you know, give me support of anything that had happened in the past has made me who I am now. But there's still guides of helping me figure out how to navigate who I am with those experiences. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes
So
sense.
I've met
And
myself in the past, but
yeah,
yeah, that's still
yeah.
showing up now.
So, I mean, okay, God, we are really all over the map today,
I'm
but you're
sorry,
making me think about,
I
no,
can't keep it
no, no,
reeled
no. I
in.
mean, no, hopefully all of this will be like, you know, interesting
We'll
enough.
tie it
And
with a pretty bow at the end.
yeah, and it may lead to, you know, deeper discussions on
Mm-hmm.
other weeks that we do. But you're also bringing up, I think, as good to point out for people that time isn't linear in the realm of energy, and a lot of people who even listen to the Mind Body Energy Project are, you know, meditators or do energy work, whether Reiki or other forms. And just the way that you can perceive your own energetic movement or presence or field, and you can perceive the energies of people that you may be working on. It's interesting that you bring up the aspect of connecting with these different energetic uh, layers of ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
it just is something too for people who may not be as familiar with energy work. You know, we can't destroy energy. Energy changes form. And that's also why there's this idea that we are eternal. Like we may leave our physical body, but we don't die in spirit. We're just changing form or leaving this physical form, but our essence carries on. And so there are these imprints or like coding of our experiences within our field of recognition. So there are a lot of experience of remembering or tuning into or being able to see. Even think of in your memory right now, you could think back to when you were in elementary school and you can see yourself. You can tap into what you felt back then, even though you're in the present moment. That speaks to the energy of you and things, and how energies don't die but can be transformed. And wow, okay, whole other show.
That was really
okay. I'll go back.
Okay.
So my first experience of perceiving anything in non-physical is when my mom and I lived in DC. So I was probably like 3 or 4 when this used to happen. But every night I remember seeing this translucent pink woman in the kitchen every night. And she was,
oh my God, I just got chills. You never told me about this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I would see her. Woo! And I would just sit like in the hallway of like where the kitchen was. And I wouldn't go into the kitchen, but I would just like sit there and just watch her. And she was just flowy. She didn't do anything. It was like she was just looking at me. I'm looking at her, but you know, I didn't get any messages or anything. It was just like my nighttime friend. I don't know. And then fast forward just throughout my life, before I did energy work, I didn't know why, but I could sense and feel energy all the time, like the presence of things like in the room or around people, but I didn't know how to translate it. So if anything, it was just like annoying. But yeah, so with that, once I did get into this work and I heard people talking about spirit guides and all of these things, I was like, what the heck is a spirit guide? So we'll just, I guess, start there now that we're like 20 minutes in. Some people consider spirit guides just that they are guides for us that are in spirit. And there are some schools of thought that some guides have been with us throughout all of our incarnations. There are, from my experience, there are some guides who come in just in particular stages in our lives, depending on what we're going through. So it's almost like, from what I have seen, that we have like these councils, like you have a whole team, like this spirit team, and they do show up or come more forward depending on what you may be going through, what you may be learning, or even if you just call them forward, you know, specifically ask for them to come forward. But then there are ones that are just there. So that's where we hear about like our guardian angels and, you know, these other types of guides or beings. What about you? What have you heard about spirit guides?
I've heard a couple of different people speak about theirs and how one friend in particular, she has very acute experiences of real life spirit guides. I mean, names, visions of what they look like, and periods of time that they'll come in and come out. But I tend to be on the same like thread of belief as you. I think you know, they all kind of have different jobs, and you may have like a few main ones that are always there for whatever reason, but then like, you know, I kind of see them as they're for everybody. It's not like you have just a particular one, like some, maybe they're assigned to you. I don't know, like you're their human this time around, but then there's other that are kind of assigned to particular lessons, or, you know, they like, just like us humans have different strengths, the different spirit guides have different strengths of their own too. So they show up when they're necessary and just kind of move about.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that. So there's a couple of things again that you said that I think it's important to point out to people. We get caught up a lot on names. And so sometimes people will be able to perceive their guides or, you know, energies around them. And if they can't distinguish a name, then it's like they throw the experience out the window because they're like, I don't know if it was real because I didn't get a name. Like, what? Okay, so first of all, you may not get a name. And I have guides that I have worked with for years that I'm only aware of who they are by what they feel like. And I have certain guides who have made their names and who they are very clear to me. But there are also guides that, again, I've been working with for years who have never told me their names, but I know exactly who they are because I know now what they feel like and how they communicate to me. So don't get too caught up in thinking you have to identify the guide or, this it by a name. Like, if anything, pay attention to what they feel like and these types of things. Why? Okay, hold on. And then the names. Oh, and like what you said too, a lot of guides are, because again, I mean, we're talking energy here. So we're not like, oh, my physical body is here and I can only be right here. There's aspects of you energetically that are all over the place right now. Okay. And the guides have that ability too. And so, for example, some people will work with angels. Archangel Michael is so popular with people like to call him in for protection. But believe me, there's like probably millions of people calling him at the same time daily. Yeah. And so don't ever think that you can't connect with certain ones that you want to, and don't limit them in our idea of how that works. Like, we may not be able to wrap our minds around how things can energetically be in multiple places simultaneously, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. And
I'm smirking because it made me think of the movie Bruce Almighty with Jim Carrey. Did you ever see that?
Mm-mm.
Well, quickly, the premise is that Jim Carrey takes on God's job. Uh-huh. So like he comes to his email and there's just like the emails are just piling in because it's all these people like asking for requests of like help from God.
Yeah.
And he's just like, how am I supposed to do all this? How am I supposed to be in all these places?
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about how Archangel Michael is out there doing things for everybody all the time.
It just, when you said that, it just reminded me of like how you could sit in a meditation and send love to multiple people simultaneously. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people do meditations where they are visualizing the entire planet and like lifting and sending love to multiple beings simultaneously. And that's done from our, limited point of view. So imagine these beings that, have a higher understanding of energy and how all of this may function. I mean, we probably can't even really conceive or wrap our brains around, how that is possible. But
well, let's point out too that they're not tied down with this physical meat suit that we have. There's a possibility we're capable of all of that too in spirit form, but we've got these tangible bodies tethering us. I'm so sorry.
No, because this is what. So one of the things too that comes up is that there are other beings in form. Like, we could call them aliens, we could call them whatever.
Oh shit, we're going down this road too.
Listen, you did it.
I know.
We're talking about other life forms, period, evidently. So, and there are many people who have had encounters with other beings who are in form. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that although they may be in form, they do have the ability to communicate telepathically or to project themselves energetically, so that what people may see or interact with doesn't always have to be their physical representation, but can be like a energetic representation of them. So I say that to say, I mean, even sometimes with, and it's just, possibility, and this has crossed my mind many times, a lot of the guides and things that we may perceive and we think that they are not in form, they may be in form somewhere and just have that ability of projection to where we can communicate with them remotely. But
whoa,
also,
I haven't thought of that one.
What I mean?
Yeah, I haven't thought of that one though before. Whoa.
Yeah, I didn't mean to blow your mind.
Yeah, it blew my mind. I was just going to say that. Now I have to go think about that. Whoa.
Okay. Well, okay. So while you think about that, what I will say is like, okay, so we have guides, which are essentially, it's like to imply that they are here to guide us in some way. We also have crossovers, which we've talked about, people who may have been in physical bodies as humans and have crossed over out of form. I also told you that we also have councils, and then again, we have these other beings that are just being. Again, they may be from other dimensions, other places. They're just beings. Like we are here just being, but we also have this ability to like cross communicate multidimensionally and in different levels of consciousness. And so again, there are different levels of existence that may have a deeper understanding of this. But the thing is that there are humans here, just so you know, who also really have a deep understanding of these things and do what we may consider impossible, or again, may not be able to conceive yet, but they're able to do it because we are designed for it. Man, I did not think this is how this conversation.
No, I didn't know how it was going to go, but oh man.
Wow. Okay, so one thing I want to just share with you before, and I want to ask you about this. It was maybe a year or two ago now. It was around the time when I had first started the Seeker Circle, which is a Facebook group. And I personally don't necessarily work with angels or archangels. You know, like all of my guides who have come through have been not really that. Although when I work on other people, I have had angels or the presence of like these archangels come in. And so I became familiar with them in that way, but they weren't necessarily who I personally was like working with directly regularly. You know, I did have that moment of like calling in Archangel Michael and being like, hey, like, what do you do? Or, you know, connecting with different ones just out of curiosity, but they weren't my main like team, I guess you would say. So I had this, a client of mine sent me a Doreen Virtue angel deck. It was the Archangels deck. I think that's what it was called, like Doreen Virtue Archangel cards. And I had them on my desk and I hadn't even opened them or used them. And then there was this one day where I was watching this girl. She sent an email of a video talking about spirit guides. And she was talking about how she works with the angels, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm listening. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And as I'm listening to her, I start to feel all this energy around me. And I start to feel the presence of something come in. And I'm like, who are you? And I heard the voice, Azrael. And I was like, Gargamel's cat? That's the only Azrael I ever heard of, right? So I'm like, the Smurfs? Like, okay. Gargamel's cat? That's crazy. But it was like, no, I had this knowing that it was an angel. And I was like, is that real? So of course I Google it, and it actually is the archangel of death and transformation. So I was like, yee. Like of all archangels, like, okay, even though I understand that death doesn't mean like it's just transformation or transition. So I thought in my mind, like, oh, I wonder if this angel is in this deck of cards. So I open the deck of cards and I'm like just taking them out of the box, and the cards kind of like, you know, split in my hand kind of, and a card falls on the floor. And what is it? Archangel Azrael. I was like, holy moly. And so then in that moment, I felt like a lot of energies come through. And I was like, oh my God, am I going to die? Because it was like the Archangel of Death came, and then all of a sudden now we got a whole tribe of people in my living room. I was really like, this isn't. And they were like, no, calm down, first of all. And so anyway, so I sat in a meditative state and allowed myself to tune in intuitively. And basically there was this message from this council of angels, which was shocking to me because, you know, it's not who I necessarily work with. And they said to tell people to ask why we're here. And I was like, what? And they were like, you know, people will call on us if like they need help with something, like, oh, I'm worried about something, let me call on the angels, or oh, I'm scared, let me call Archangel Michael, or oh, I don't know, whatever. We call them in for what we want or need. But they were saying all of your guides are here to help you serve a higher purpose as well. Like, we don't mind helping you with your request, but if you asked us why we were here to help you, you would find out something else. Do you see what I mean? So it was kind of like, if we are really here to support you in your awakening while you're asking for parking spaces, I mean, that's cool. We'll help you with whatever you want. But if you ask us, we can help you for like higher ways or higher reasons. So
I like that.
Anyway, just there you go. There's that PSA again.
That's a good PSA. I
Yeah.
think it's really important to, well, one, just think about, because it probably isn't something that we've thought about before, that we, I think we use our spirit guides to help us through life,
Mm-hmm.
but our spirit guides are also there to help us live our best life and to
Mm-hmm.
help us with the potential of what it is that we actually are here for. I mean,
Right.
if you do believe in these realms and in these things like spirit guides, then why wouldn't you believe that you are here for a greater purpose than just to exist and get through what we call the human experience, I
Yeah.
think that's something really interesting to think about. And I think um, it pushes the envelope a little bit of our responsibility of actually existing here.
Yeah. And part of like in my belief of like what I have experienced and what I've learned and even working with guides and all of these different things is that, our higher purpose there, there's purpose in everything we do. Okay. There's purpose in like why Tiffany and I are doing the podcast right now. There's purpose in you listening. There's purpose in every freaking part of your day, the person you said hi to on the street. But like our higher purpose goes beyond like just what we may do externally. A lot of the work that we're doing is we are learning through experience here in this realm. We're learning about emotion, about feeling, about being in body, but we also have a opportunity to learn what it means to be in body from a higher state of consciousness. So, it's like we're here and existing, and depending on our personal focus or our perceptions or the state of consciousness we're functioning from, that's going to lend to the experience that we have in this lifetime. And when a lot of us come into this questioning and seeking and all of these things, we are really seeking to have this human experience from a higher state of awareness. So, that's when you think of it in terms of, okay, so perhaps your guides are here to help you understand life from a higher view, not just to help you, I don't know, get a new job. Do you see
Yeah.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah. As you're saying that, it's almost as if we couldn't understand higher consciousness unless we had this human experience. We need the human experience in order to try to even attempt to understand higher consciousness.
yeah.
Because
And
otherwise we would be higher consciousness and we wouldn't have a need for the understanding of it.
well, this is the thing. So the way that it comes through is like, we really are higher consciousness, but this existence in form uh reinforms us, because like, okay, it's
Yeah.
like I am higher consciousness who wanted to come down to experience
Mm-hmm.
creating in a new type of way. I wanted to learn how to interact and create and exist in this particular form, in this particular vibration. But also while I am here, I can learn how to, or figure out how to do that from a higher way. So like it comes into like thinking about the collective consciousness, right? We were born into this reality that already had systems in place, beliefs in place, societal views, all of these things were
Mm-hmm.
already in place. So we come into this and it's like, oh, we're interacting with this, and we believe it all, right? But there's this higher aspect of us that knows all of these things that we are experiencing and seeing could be reknown in a new way. I can't even believe this is coming out of my mouth. This is exactly what they were talking about at the Paul Selig event. Fuck, sorry. Um, but anyway,
Well,
so
it's like
it's like,
breaking the chains.
yeah, so it's like, it's not that like the world around us, it changes first through our perception.
Mm-hmm.
How we see things is what creates the collective shift. So it's like back to that whole idea of what we are trying to do is to understand from a higher way while being in this dense form.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know. Are we even talking about spirit guides?
I mean, yeah, to some degree. Because, like I said before, I mean, I think that we are some form of a spirit guide or a piece of that energy in this human meat suit form to some degree, and like once
Yeah.
we go away, once this body goes away, we've labeled ourselves human and as this being, and like we believe that this could just be it, or the possibility if we don't seek the higher consciousness of it, but I don't even know where I was going. There's too many things going on in my head right now.
I know. Well, you just reminded me of another thing. I know this conversation, like,
This
it's
has
so
gotten
crazy
real. Yeah.
how we never know, like, what is going to come out of our
So
mouth.
again, Patreons, if you want to see us get like crazy out of our heads, go ahead and suggest something.
I know, suggest our topics.
Yeah,
I'm actually thinking ahead of, like, I can't wait for the bonus content that we create for the Patreons around this. But one of the things that you said is I have an online class called Intuitive Mastery, and one of the modules is about meeting your guides. And I remember when I was teaching that class live, it actually came through, this message came through that, like, our guides were saying, we're just like a higher aspect of you in terms of, okay, so it comes back to the whole idea of oneness, right? We're all projections of this one consciousness. We're all projections of the one, like, God mind, Buddha mind, universal consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And so it's like they are also an aspect of the same source energy that we are aspects of, but they are just vibrating in a different frequency than we are. So in that way, it was like the point of why they were saying it is like you could also look at us as different, a higher aspect of your own intelligence, or you're a different aspect of your own beingness, and we're here to support you in remembering. But God dang it, it seems like let me go back to spirit guide talk, okay?
Yeah. Let's try to simplify this.
So while you may have guides that are like part of your council, or who knows why you have those agreements, that's something you can look at intuitively. If you sense your guides already, if you're already working with guides, you may want to ask them why they are supporting you or how they can support you on your path, because what comes through for you might be different than what you are currently working with them on. You may learn more than what you expected. But you also have the ability to call in certain guides if there are ones you want to work with. So again, a lot of people intentionally call in archangels. Some people intentionally call in different teachers like Jesus or Buddha or whoever. All of these different energies people connect with and communicate with. And just for like fun, I'll tell you, I think, did I talk about this already? Anyway, I talked about the intuitive class I took in our last episode. I took an intuitive, it was a book writing class. I don't know why we were talking about that last week. But anyway, it was this book writing class, but it was like writing from your intuitive mind. And in that class, the teacher told us to all call in the energy of a writer who we admired, who had crossed over, who could help us with our writing, or that we could learn something from.
Interesting.
So I thought, like, okay, I'm gonna call in William Blake. Okay, so I like go into my intuitive space, I'm calling in William Blake, and I'm like, hey, yeah, like, thanks for helping me. And he's like, nah. And I was like, wait, what? Are you allowed to say no to me? Like, I didn't know that they could be like, you know what I mean? And I was like, wait, is that allowed? Like, what do you mean? And he's like, no, like, yes, you can call me in, but I'm not the one that will best support you in the work that you're trying to work on. So I was just so confused by this. Like, I couldn't believe that was the message, because you know what I mean? And so then the next thing you know, I see intuitively in front of me this man who's like tall and very like slim and in a suit and looked very serious. And I'm like, who are you? And he said, Tesla. And I was like, wait a minute. The guy that has to do with electricity? Because like all I know about Tesla was like, you know, the energy, you know, that he had to do with electricity and all this stuff. But I was focused on
AC/DC.
Yeah, I was
the DC part. Or the AC part. I don't know.
I was more concerned with like energy work, like this type of energy work, not electricity. Do you see what I mean? So I was so confused, and I was like, ugh. So I kind of shut down, and I was like, man, what the heck kind of crap is this, right? So then later when I went home, I looked up Tesla, and I saw that he actually has a lot of connection with the esoteric, and he would say that a lot of his genius or information that he got from other beings in other realms. And so I was like, oh, okay, Tesla, gotcha. Okay. So then I reconnected with him and got some information, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, point of the story is you can intentionally ask to connect with certain energies if you want to learn from them. And they may be different than you imagined, because I called him Buddha once and that personality was not what I imagined it to be. So what about you? Have you worked with specific guides intentionally?
Ones that have shown up for me, I have called in intentionally. There was one that showed up and it was really interesting because the name was kind of strange and it happened to be like a spirit guide of love. And when I looked up the name, it was a form, I forget which, I don't know if it was Italian or Latin or something, but there was some root word within that name that had to do with love. And then even crazier, I went to a crystal shop one day and the spirit quartz caught my eye out of all of them from like across the room. So I got this specific spirit quartz and I was looking it up and the color of it was very specific. So that particular one, I looked it up and it was almost the same exact word that was the name of the spirit guide. And I was like, how is this happening? I'm like, this is freaking crazy. So it was kind of like a reinforcement. So I would call in that specific guide when I was trying to understand things that had to do with that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That made me think of the first time I intentionally called in a guide was in my very first Reiki class. Our teacher was also, she also did shamanic practices. And so she did a shamanic journey with us to meet our animal guide or our totem guide. And mine came through and she told us to ask for a name, and I asked for a name, and the name was something I had never heard, and I thought I was making it up because back then, you know, I was like, this is all weird. And when I went home and Googled the name, it actually was a real name. It was a Hebrew name, and it actually translated as gift of God. So then I got really excited because I knew I didn't make it up. But I'm trying my best. This is so weird. I feel like I'm trying not to channel this whole conversation. But what I was going to say is connecting with your guides. So for those of you listening, a lot of people want to know how to connect with their guides. And one of the easiest ways is you can ask them to show up. You can ask them to show you or give you evidence of them being present. Like if you don't feel yet that you can see them or feel them energetically, like some people have that thing of every time I see a feather, I know it's my guides, or every time I see a butterfly, I know it's someone, you know, people have different ways of identifying the presence of support. So you can do that, or you can do a guided meditation to ask your guides to come forward and reveal themselves to you. So how have you connected with yours? Did you do it intentionally, or was it just like one day they just were there?
I think it's been either guided or supported. Like I said, when I was working with my friend, there were two friends intuitive friends that I had worked with that guides had showed up. So because they had showed up in those sessions, I started working with them and kind of experiencing them. But I think one of my first distinct meeting of a guides was with you when we did my first Reiki class. And that's kind of like the spearhead of my spirit group was that spirit guide. And there was actually two of them that showed up at that time. One was a little bit more in the forefront than the others, but since then those two have kind of they've always been there no matter what. They're like the ones that are assigned particularly to me.
Yes. Don't you love that? That's funny you say, because like the animal guide that I met in my first Reiki class, I didn't really work with them after that. I mean, like I noticed them around it was very rarely. Like they didn't ever really like come forward to like communicate with me so much. But what started happening is as I was practicing Reiki more, I started to notice the presence of particular guides. And there are two who have distinctly like been with me and work with me very closely, pretty consistently over these last years, however many years it's been. And then there are other ones who I am very familiar with, but they only come in for particular things or, you know, at particular times. And then there is this council, or this presence of energy that is not necessarily, they don't work with me as like a guide would, so to speak, as much as like I work with them to learn and receive information, like when I'm channeling or communicating in that way. But yeah, I tend to notice that they do seem like, how you said earlier, have certain jobs or show up for very particular, you know, some show up in Reiki sessions, some show up not, like whatever.
I love how you keep saying council, because sometimes I feel like I can hear the group talking about me. Like I'm not calling on them for anything, or I'm just like going about my day, like doing what I do. And then I hear them talking about me and I'm like, what are you guys saying? And then it brings me more into the present moment of being mindful of my behaviors and my choices of action too.
Yeah.
You know, so it's almost like the lessons that I call on them for, or that I'm trying to understand, or that I'm trying to include them in, or questions I'm trying to ask, I like at some other point in time, I might be going about doing whatever, and it is the same kind of situation, but maybe I'm not paying attention to it at that point. And then I hear them talking about it like, oh, she's doing this because of that. And I'm like, so then I start to tune in. I'm like, what? Tell me, like, help me.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because it makes me want to point out like this categorization of very specifically for a moment. So again, like how we have guardian angels and like more protective energies around us versus like our guides and like these councils that are supporting us in other ways. And so with our like guardian angels and these types of things, a lot of people have had experiences of being aware of their guardians when they needed help, like literally, like whether it was a car accident or something like really odd happened, and they were like, oh my God, my angels were there protecting me, or I could sense my angels there protecting me. Even sometimes just in interacting with other humans, people sense their guides there in a protective way. And so, you know, there's two sides to this, because some people are like, well, why do things happen to us and they don't intervene? And then why other times do they intervene? And there are different schools of thought around that. And from what I have been told around that is sometimes like say something, you know, shit happens, like, you know, like unexpected things. We all have free will. We're all contributing to this collective. And say, for example, I had an agreement or something that I was meant to carry out, but some accident started to like circumvent whatever it was I was leading towards. Like perhaps my team would come in to like help prevent whatever was about to circumvent what I was going to move forward with. Where there are other times where perhaps, you know, there isn't any intervention because on a soul level, perhaps the person didn't want it. I don't know. But, you know, so there's a lot of schools of thought around that, but that can get really sticky and people get very in their feelings about it. So I'm just saying that is a different grouping. We're not talking about our guardians today necessarily, but on the other side of the fence, the guides, they do have, again, these jobs, like you said, and it's really interesting because they don't infringe on our free will. So that's why it is important to, you know, well, not important, you don't have to, but if you care to, like build relationships with them so that you can see how they really can support you on your path or what you're learning. I mean, listen, I was calling in my guides to help me understand chakras beyond what I read in books. I was like, meh, I'm skeptical. I was like, I don't know what these people are saying. Can you guys come in and help me understand chakra energy? Can you guys come in and help me understand energy transformation? So you literally can ask them to support you in learning and understanding in ways, again, that may be beyond what you're currently asking for.
I think that's a really, really great point that you bring up, because I think that you, Yolanda, are very unique in that. And because you have to really trust where that information is coming from, or trust not understanding where that information is coming from in order to gain information that is above and beyond this tangible realm.
Yeah.
I know I struggle with that. I will go in there and I'll get information. I'll be like, okay, it makes sense, but I'm heavily dependent on books and what's happening here now and things being scientifically proven, or, you know, pseudoscience can lend itself to some sort of validation. I think to take it a step beyond and ask, you have to like really trust what these guides are and stuff. And I would just encourage people to have that experience of trusting it and going into that. I think even just stepping into that experience of surrendering to asking questions like that of guides in order to get information is really scary. But again, until you get in there and try it on and experience it and then start to validate, like reconcile that information that you get with what the experience here is in the physical realm, I think is super important. But again, I think it's a really hard step for people to take.
Oh, that was that was like awkward. I thought you were gonna keep going.
No, that's it.
So there's two part. No, what you say, I mean, that's is very true. And so I will share there are two components to that helped me with that. Maybe three. One is that I really am a curious person. And so like I always, although I'm skeptical, I've always been kind of like anything is possible, but I'm still skeptical. But I think that openness of possibility and really being open to the idea that I don't know, like, you know what I mean? Like maybe it is possible. That has helped me a lot in this. But one of the main things, again, that helped me with trusting is one, that relationship building first with my guides. So it's not like they started coming around and I was just like, oh, you guys, I trust you. I was like, no, like, what is this? Why do I feel you? Where are these words coming from? What is anybody talking about? And so when I first started communicating with my guides, I would write down the messages that would come through and what I would sense and what they would share. And I started to trust it because, first of all, the language that they used was not how I would speak. So I knew it wasn't like my thoughts because I don't speak this way. But another thing was the way that they would present things were also in ways that I would never consider or have thought about. So that's how I started building the relationship with them, was firstly just showing up and making the attempt to communicate with them regularly. I mean, to the point where there was a period where I was connecting intuitively with my guides every single day. Like I made it a part of my practice every day to sit, connect, ask questions, and write down what came through. And that consistency is what strengthened not just my trust, but also my receptivity, because the act of me sitting there and writing down was opening me up more to the possibility of like information is coming through. Do you see what I mean? So that was one part that helped me to trust. The other aspect of it is when I was working on people intuitively and I would ask them like, what the hell am I looking at? What does this mean? What is energy moving? What is it? Blah, blah, blah. Like, again, the things that would come through, I would have times where after the session, I would ask the person like, hey, what came up for you? And they would echo back something that was very like in alignment with what my guides were showing me or telling me about the movement of their energy. So I had these different experiences of things being validated for me to where it was like, oh, okay, I can trust. The last component of this I'll say is that I didn't just trust blindly any guides. I, again, became very familiar with my guides. I'm very familiar with, if they come through, I know who they are. If there are other energies that come through that are unfamiliar to me, you can't just assume just because you sense something that it is there for your support. Just like, we may have to do 5 episodes on this one.
I know.
But the point is, you can build a relationship with your guides, your team, your counsel, all of this.
Yeah.
You become familiar enough with them that you do start to trust and know them.
I think those are all really great explanations or steps to consider in trying to work into understanding spirit guides. And to simplify it even more, as you were talking about those 3 things, what I was hearing were the 3 words that I heard were discipline, practice, and responsibility. And I think those are the 3 really important things that get us there that we easily lose sight of in our daily experiences, just day to day. You have to be disciplined and you have to practice. and it is your responsibility to set that in motion in order to achieve what it is you're talking about.
No, totally.
Wanted to throw that out there as a call to action, because those are kind of the three main things that are pervasive in our lives when we're trying to achieve anything. And we lose sight of those sometimes. And then we sit back and wonder, why can't I do this?
Right. Yeah. No, it's so true.
I'm going through it right now. So
yeah. No, it's so true. It's so funny you said that. I just told my friend this morning, I was like, I need to block a day of no work coming up very soon, just to get my mind right. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, no, I literally need to block a day with the intention of just getting all this, just nothing else, just this.
Yeah.
And and again, that's part of the practice. And you're so right, because another thing in this, even I went through it in the beginning too, wanting it to be right away, being impatient, doubting because it wasn't what I thought it should look like, all of those things.
As you're saying this, I'm applying it to 8 different things in my life right now. That's a personal problem. I'll take care of it off the air, maybe.
No, well, what is so funny is all of this too, it teaches you patience. It really teaches you patience. It teaches you trust. It teaches you a lot of different lessons that can be applied to every area of your life. And,
amen, sister.
Yeah. So spirit guides, they're more helpful than I even thought.
Who knew? Who knew until we dove deep into this?
I know. Well, hopefully, because I think we are probably at about an hour now. I know this is long.
This is intense.
Thank you for staying with us on this.
Yeah.
And hopefully we did shed some light on spirit guides. I'm still not sure if we really spoke about them or not, but I think we did. However, if we did trigger any thought or questions for you throughout this conversation, and you're like, why didn't you guys go deeper about blah, blah, blah?
Yeah.
Join us next week for the live event.
Mm-hmm.
We will be here. Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I'm telling the truth.
Next Wednesday.
I will still be in town, I believe.
You will be in town.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I will be here next Wednesday. So next Wednesday is our live event. And if you have questions, be sure to show up and ask them, and we can talk about this collectively. Or if you aren't able to attend the live event, email us. If you email us the questions, we promise we will cover it on that show. So you can either send us a message on our Facebook page, which is MBE Project on Facebook, or go to mbeproject.com, which is our website, and you can email us there.
Yeah, and then you can check our Instagram too for updates of what time that live event will be and all other things that are happening in the MBE project world.
We currently suck at Instagram, but we promise we're going to get better at it in 2019.
Yeah, we promise.
Yeah,
we're working on the content. This is where it's at.
I know our focus is entirely on the content right now.
The marketing thing is it's a whole
social media.
Is there anybody that wants an unpaid internship position?
Yes. Do you just want to handle our social media for us? We would highly appreciate you.
Yeah, just out of the goodness of your heart.
Yeah. So this should be interesting. I hope that you guys do have questions or even stories that you want to share. Let us know about how you connected with your guides, what it's like for you working with your guides, or, anything. We love it all.
Yeah. Give it to us. All right. We should let them go.
Yeah, we should let you go. Sorry for taking so long today, but thank you always for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for joining. Bye.